President Biden launched his 2024 campaign this week, and in his pre-taped, highly produced video announcement, Vice President Kamala Harris had a very prominent role. Of course, he wants to remind us of the historic, diverse choice that he made, but he also may be hoping to calm the worry voiced by many Americans about his age. In a recent NBC News poll, 70% of adults said that Biden should not run again, and asked if age was a factor in saying he shouldn't run, a total of 69% said yes. You'll remember in 1984, concern was voiced about Ronald Reagan running for re-election at age 73. At 80, Biden is already the oldest president in history. If re-elected, he'd be sworn in at age 82. At the end of a second term, he'd be 86. And concerns about that means increased focus on Vice President Kamala Harris. Right now, her aggregate disapproval rating is currently at 54%, according to 538. And to date, she's not had much traction in the areas with which she's been tasked as the number two, like the border and voting rights. She recently has been making appearances around other popular Democratic causes, such as infrastructure and abortion rights. Asked by Kara Swisher on her podcast about Harris, former White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain said this.
Why hasn't she been able to shake the perception that she's bad at her job? And give me a little more of a nuanced answer. I know sexism and racism are a huge problem, but that doesn't explain all the bad press.
Well, I do think sexism and racism are part of the problem, no question about it. I think that, I think she was not as well known in national politics before she became vice president. And, I think that, she just hasn't had the right. She hasn't gotten the credit for all that she's done. She's done a lot of very hard work and been very successful as vice president. And I think hopefully during the campaign season, the American people will get more of a chance to see her on the stump and get to know her a little better.
My next guest, Thomas Friedman, recently wrote this column in the New York Times, Why Kamala Harris Matters So Much in 2024. Thomas Friedman joins me now. He is a three-time Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times columnist. He's the author of 7 best-selling books, including The World is Flat, and most recently, Thank You for Being Late. Tom, thank you for coming back. Context matters. You are very much for the re-election of President Joe Biden. In fact, that's what prompted you to write this piece in part.
Well, Michael, first of all, thanks for having me. Yes, the real point of my piece was that there are, in my view, we're at a critical juncture, and 3 things cannot happen. Israel cannot turn into Hungary, an authoritarian democracy. Putin cannot win in Ukraine. Ukraine cannot go Putin. And Donald J. Trump must never, ever, 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 ever be back in the White House. So that is my priority, and that is my focus. And so what I'm asking is, what is the best Democratic ticket to win that election? And to me, the ticket you need is one that appeals to the very forces that enabled Democrats to do so well in the midterms, which were moderates, independents, who looked at Trump, looked at his agenda, and particularly the election denialism, and voted against virtually every election denier in that election. This is going to be a close election if it's Trump versus Biden, and we need the center, we need the moderate and independents and white working class to come out for Biden in enough numbers that he can win. This is code red.
Here's a paragraph in the piece that I circled. I'll read it aloud and put it on the screen so that folks at home can read it. It's no secret that Vice President Harris has not elevated her stature in the last 2+ years. I don't know what the problem is, whether she was dealt an impossible set of issues to deal with, or is in over her head, or is contending with a mix of sexism and racism as the first woman of color to serve as vice president. All I know is that doubts among voters about her abilities to serve as president, which were significant enough for her to quit as a presidential candidate even before the Iowa caucuses in 2020, have not gone away. I played the clip from the intro of Kara Swisher asking Ron Klain about this. His opinions seem to be buying into the idea that it's the sexism and racism. You don't seem to have a choice as among these causes of what it would be.
Well, I don't know. I'm not an expert. I think for some voters, she comes off as inauthentic, and she hasn't been able to overcome that. I'm sure the border issue and some of the things she's had to deal with, I don't know what the problem is. All I know, Michael, is that when you have a president who's going to be 86 years old at the end of his second term, the question of succession becomes much, much more important. And it will, normally people don't choose, they don't vote around the vice president, they vote around the president. But if Trump is the Republican candidate, and say he decides to ask Nikki Haley or Tim Scott to run with him, that could be a very formidable ticket that a lot of moderate and independent voters who do not want Trump to be president could look at that ticket and plug their nose and vote for him again. And so that's my whole focus here. I have nothing against the vice president. I wish you well. This is a really important moment. And we need people who believe that Trump must never be in the White House again. The Democrats have to have the best ticket possible, and one that will definitely appeal to moderates and independents who showed up for Biden in enough numbers to really tip the midterm the right way.
Okay, so in the piece, you also argue that the president needs to deal with this head on. He needs to address it. Have you thought about what does that actually look like?
Well, some people tell you that maybe he should consider a different vice president, someone like Hakeem Jeffries, who I think plays very well to the center. I'm always impressed every time I hear him speak. Biden clearly does not want to go down that road. You aired his announcement video. Maybe there's ways to help Vice President Harris establish herself more with centrists and independents. But just to bet, Michael, that the abortion issue will bring enough voters around and that there isn't a question of succession, I think is a very dangerous and reckless way to go into this next election.
Tom, I looked at the reader picks among the New York Times reader responses. There's a consistent theme to a number of them, which is to say that the out here is the Supreme Court of the United States.
Well, for that, you would need a Supreme Court justice to retire, or something has to happen. You have to have an opening. I would certainly be, if that were to happen, I think that's a very legitimate possibility.
I think that there's some political malpractice being committed on the part of the White House that relates to this. No doubt you saw the story this week about the president at the presser with the Korean president reaching into his pocket, pulling out a question, calling on a reporter from the LA Times. I need to make very clear that there was not an apples to apples of what was in his pocket and what she then asked of him. But nevertheless, it fosters this perception that he requires that level of assistance.
Well, I'm one of the few reporters who've had a chance to have lunch with the president by ourselves, the two of us, and I was very impressed with his cognitive ability, his awareness on issues. He could go deep on, and we were talking mostly foreign policy. I'm not worried about that now, frankly, Michael, but I am concerned that 6 years from now, 5 years from now, that could be an issue just actuarially. And therefore, my point is the vice presidential choice in this election will matter more than ever. And Democrats have to have the right vice president going into this election because, Michael, this election will matter more than ever. 4 more years of Trump in the White House, Putin in Ukraine, or Israel going autocratic, and the whole world, as you know it, will be changed in a very bad way. Donald Trump must never, ever, 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 ever be in the White House again.
Final thought, quickly, if you don't mind. This is a sensitive subject. I've tried to handle it in an adult fashion in the same way that you've written about it. What kind of reaction did you get personally to addressing this matter?
Read the comments on the column. They were overwhelmingly supportive of the point I was raising.
They were. It's true. Yeah, it's true. Hey, stick around. I want to lean on a 3-time Pulitzer Prize winner to respond to social media. I'll read it aloud. Catherine, put it up and I'll share it with Tom. What does it say? If anyone ever watched Kamala Harris question a witness in a Senate hearing, you would see why I think she is talented. Sorry some have biased impression of her. She may not be popular, but so what? You would say what to Robert on that, Tom?
The polls are the polls. I'm not saying she's not a competent and skilled person. The question is, does she connect with enough voters in the way that will be really decisive in this election. That's the point.